The fall of 1776 marked the darkest hour in American history. George Washington's Continental Army had suffered devastating defeats at Long Island and Manhattan, and now they faced annihilation in New Jersey. But what appeared to be the collapse of the Revolution was actually setting the stage for one of the greatest military comebacks in human history. Earl Cornwallis had taken command of British forces in New Jersey with a simple mission: crush the rebellion once and for all. His target was Fort Lee, strategically positioned on the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River. For weeks, British and Hessian reinforcements had been pouring into the region, creating an overwhelming force of professional soldiers against Washington's dwindling army of farmers and volunteers. On the night of November 19th, Cornwallis moved with devastating efficiency. 2 battalions of Hessian grenadiers, companies of elite British light infantry, and thousands of regular troops crossed the Hudson under cover of darkness. By dawn, they had established a beachhead just 5 miles from Fort Lee. The trap was closing. General Nathaniel Greene commanded Fort Lee, but he faced an impossible situation. His scouts reported massive enemy forces approaching from multiple directions, while British warships controlled the river, cutting off any hope of naval escape. The fort's cannons, positioned to defend against river assault, were useless against this land-based attack. What happened next would have broken lesser commanders. As Cornwallis's forces surrounded the fort, Greene received urgent orders from Washington: evacuate immediately. There would be no glorious last stand, no heroic defense. Instead, the Americans would do something that went against every military tradition. They would run. But this wasn't cowardice, this was strategic genius. Greene's men abandoned everything: tents, blankets, cooking equipment, precious artillery pieces, and months of supplies fell into British hands. The soldiers grabbed only their weapons and whatever food they could carry, then began a desperate march across the frozen New Jersey landscape. The British and Hessian forces occupied Fort Lee to find it still warm. Fires burned in the hearths, meals sat half-eaten on tables, and military supplies worth thousands of pounds lay scattered everywhere. To the professional European soldiers, this looked like complete panic, a rabble army dissolving in chaos. They were wrong. Washington had learned something that would revolutionize warfare. Sometimes the greatest victory comes from refusing to fight on your enemy's terms. While Cornwallis celebrated capturing empty fortifications, Washington was executing something far more sophisticated than retreat. He was redefining what it meant to win a war. The Continental Army's march across New Jersey became a masterclass in strategic withdrawal. They moved fast enough to stay ahead of British pursuit, but maintained enough cohesion to remain a fighting force. Local civilians, inspired by their determination, provided food, shelter, and intelligence about enemy movements. This wasn't an army in flight, it was an army adapting. Cornwallis pursued relentlessly, confident that crushing this fleeing rebel force would end the rebellion. His professional troops moved with parade ground precision, following textbook tactics that had conquered half the world. But they were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the textbook. Every mile the Americans retreated, they grew stronger. British supply lines stretched longer, while American knowledge of local terrain increased. Hessian mercenaries, accustomed to European warfare, struggled with the vast distances and hostile population. Most importantly, Washington was buying something more precious than territory: time to think, plan, and transform his army. The retreat revealed the fundamental difference between the two forces. The British were fighting to crush a rebellion. The Americans were fighting for something that had never existed before. They weren't just defending territory, they were defending an idea that had taken human form. As winter deepened, that idea began to manifest in unexpected ways. New Jersey militia units, seeing Washington's army survive impossible odds, started emerging from hiding to harass British supply convoys. Farmers who had remained neutral began providing intelligence to American scouts. The collapse that Cornwallis expected never materialized. Instead, something remarkable happened. The Continental Army reached the Delaware River not as a broken force, but as a hardened unit that had learned to survive anything the world's greatest military power could throw at them. They had discovered they could endure what professional soldiers could not, fighting for a cause greater than themselves. Washington established winter quarters across the Delaware, and British commanders assumed the campaign was over. European armies didn't fight in winter. Gentlemen soldiers waited for spring, maintained their positions, and planned next year's movements. This was how civilized warfare worked. But these weren't civilized times, and Washington's army wasn't bound by European conventions. On Christmas night, 1776, as Hessian troops in Trenton settled into comfortable winter quarters, confident that no army would march in a blizzard, Washington proved that everything the British thought they knew about warfare was wrong. The same army that had fled from Fort Lee crossed an ice-choked river in the middle of a winter storm. The attack on Trenton wasn't just a military victory, it was a statement. The force that had retreated across New Jersey returned as something the British had never encountered, an army that could lose every conventional battle and still win the war. The Hessians, professional soldiers who had conquered battlefields across Europe, were completely unprepared for what hit them. Within 2 hours, Washington's defeated army had captured nearly 1,000 enemy troops, seized massive quantities of weapons and supplies, and announced to the world that the American Revolution was far from over. News of Trenton spread across America like wildfire. The same army that European newspapers had declared destroyed just weeks earlier had delivered a victory that changed everything. Recruitment surged as Americans realized they were fighting alongside soldiers who could turn defeat into triumph. More importantly, European powers began to take notice. French diplomats who had been cautious about supporting what appeared to be a losing cause started serious discussions about alliance. The rabble army that had fled Fort Lee had demonstrated something that impressed professional military minds. They could learn, adapt, and win. The retreat through New Jersey had taught Washington's army lessons no European military academy could provide. They learned that survival was victory when facing superior force. They discovered that knowing when not to fight was as important as knowing how to fight. Most crucially, they realized that an army fighting for revolutionary ideals could endure hardships that would break traditional forces. These lessons would define American military doctrine for centuries. From the Civil War to World War II, American forces would demonstrate the same principles Washington learned in that desperate winter: tactical flexibility, strategic patience, and the understanding that winning a war requires more than winning battles. The retreat from Fort Lee lasted just a few weeks, but its impact shaped the character of American military leadership. It proved that sometimes the greatest courage comes from making decisions that look like weakness to conventional minds. It demonstrated that true strategic thinking means sacrificing short-term glory for long-term victory. When military historians study the American Revolution, they often focus on dramatic battles and famous victories. But the real turning point wasn't a battle at all. It was the moment Washington chose to retreat from Fort Lee, preserving his army to fight another day. That decision, made in the darkest hour of the Revolution, created the foundation for everything that followed. The soldiers who marched across frozen New Jersey in November 1776 weren't just retreating from an enemy. They were advancing toward a new understanding of what it meant to serve something greater than themselves.
They were becoming the first American military force, and their example would inspire generations of Americans who understood that sometimes victory requires the courage to do what others think is impossible.